pua ni ra pono whakapainga e nei hui. O mai te piki ora me te maramatanga na rei mama no e tautoko ai ni ākane ai. So, Pākehā version I'll leave to Piri.
He's just done karakia.
They didn't fit Piri. Was not fit.
Well, welcome everybody.
Welcome.
We have a quorum, so we shall get on to our agenda. First thing up, we have a couple of apologies, one from Liz Munro and Mike Mohi. Could I have a move and a seconder for those apologies? Yep, in a way.
I'll second.
And Martin. Kia ora, Martin. Okay, next on our list, any conflicts of interest to declare, people? Thank you. Kia ora. Moving on, we got the confirmation of the minutes of the Regional Planning Committee held on the 3rd of June 2020 and the Extraordinary Regional Planning Committee held on the 22nd of July 2020. So I will take those minutes as read. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the 3rd of June 2020 and a seconder?
So moved.
Jeff and Martin. And can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the 22nd of July 2020, the extraordinary meeting? Those that were there. And away again. And Corona. And those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now I can call for minor items not on the agenda. Do we have any minor items not on the agenda? Any items? Minor items for agenda? No.
Chair, can I suggest we ask whether Tanya and Tanya can turn their video on just so we can see if they wish to speak?
Okay. Tanya and the rest of those that don't have their videos on, can you turn them on please so we can see you, to see if you wish to speak?
Kia ora, Jonella. I can hardly hear you speaking. I don't know how the other Zoom participants are, but I'm having trouble hearing.
Very hard.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll just turn our volume up. Thank you. Moving on, there are no items of minor issues, or minor items not on the agenda. So our first decision item is the tank, plan change hearing commissioners and panel appointments. I think, Rex, did you have something to add to the number 5?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. I thought that we should hold this discussion in public excluded because we are talking about people, and I didn't think, and their careers, I didn't think that last time it was, I was the Chair and I was responsible for that, was a very good show. So I would recommend that we go to public excluded to talk about the commissioners and then come out of it and announce the commissioners that we have chosen.
Okay. So would you like to move in that direction?
Oh, sounds much better now.
I would move in that direction.
Before we do, Chair, look, I just feel duty bound to advise the committee that under the Local Government Act, I as the Chief Executive am required to notify on the agenda any matters that will be considered in public excluded with 2 days advance warning. And so if the committee wants to have a discussion, an informal discussion, my recommendation would be that the meeting be adjourned and then perhaps the committee could have a cup of tea and have a discussion before coming back and having more formal deliberation. But going to public excluded is not able to be achieved without that being formally notified on the agenda in advance.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Happy?
Happy.
My apologies, Madam Chair. I was just signalling that I support James's suggestion.
Okay.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just wondered whether we did defer for the moment agenda item 5 and we proceeded to 6, 7 and 8, perhaps even the rest of those, and then had had a break for a cup of tea and then came back.
Came back for number 5.
Yep, okay.
I think that's a good idea.
How do members feel about that we defer to the final item? Yep,
I'm okay with that.
okay. Fine, cool, thank you.
6.
So we move on to item 6, which is the outdoor burning, which we have a presentation from staff. Belinda and Kathleen.
Put the chair on mute, please.
That one.
No, that one.
Come on, work. No.
That chair on the TV.
60 years, hasn't worked yet.
68 years.
He's picking on you then, Jeff.
He's picking on him, he's on the TV.
He's got a
Mrs.
slideshow.
Graham didn't put a mute button on it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's just not on
The nurse should have cut the vocal cords rather than the
there.
umbilical cord.
See it on the screen.
Belinda.
Oh, on the main screen. Oh, it's on the main screen.
You want to do it on this one too?
Yeah, I want to do it.
So just escape. Where's escape on it? Oh, there.
It's on the chair, it gives no item.
Right. Okay. Got it wrong here.
We've seen this, very good.
I can't get any charge going with my iPad. Died.
Here we go.
Yeah,
Switched on.
it's switched on. Everything else works.
There you go, ladies.
It hates
well.
me.
Afternoon, everyone. Kathleen and I are just going to talk to you about outdoor burning. So we have two choices here. We can either just go straight into the different options and then go back to the slides as we discuss the key issues that you're raising, or Kathleen and I can go through this presentation, and essentially it just takes you through, it gives you a bit of a context, background, existing rules, problem scope, health effects, monitoring, modelling, and then the options.
Through and then the options.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's a few rules in the RMP that essentially cover outdoor burning in the region. So first of all, we have Rule 19A, and that essentially permits outdoor burning across the whole region, providing it is trees, branches, plants, wood, paper. There are limits around what kind of smoke can be at the boundary of the site. Can't be offensive or objectionable. And there are some special requirements that if you are located in the Napier or the Hastings airsheds, then you can't undertake that burning during May to September. So that leads me to Rule 19E, and this is the exemption for that, the Rule 19A that we just talked about. So there's no burning in the Napier Hastings airsheds unless it's for disease control or orchard redevelopment. And again, it's quite a, you'll see in the attachment, it's quite a big lengthy rule. This is just a summary. But if there's no viable alternative, and there's no inversion layer, and there's no smoke at the boundary, then providing it's for disease control and orchard redevelopment, that can be carried out during that time. Moving on to Rule 20A. This is another one. We've got it in our plan as a permitted activity, but essentially the minister, if it's happening under the Biosecurity Act anyway, can just overrule the plan. So if the burning is for disease control or where HBRC has declared a biosecurity risk, then the burning can carry out. Moving on to Rule 19B. So this is another rule for the whole region. So outdoor burning for fireworks displays and for firefighting training, it's permitted. Again, standard rules, no offensive or objectionable smoke beyond the boundary, and the property can't be in the Napier Hastings airsheds if it's May to September. It's got a slightly different one clause in it, which you'll see down there, is that the council must be notified 2 days prior to burning. And then lastly, Rule 20, which is nice and clear cut. So these materials, and again, these are a long list, this is just a summary, these materials are prohibited. You can't burn them, can't outdoor burn them. standard, which what you'd expect really, waste oil, plastics, tyres, asbestos. Okay. Moving on, so that's the context of the existing rules in the plan. Moving on to outdoor burning and the problem scope that we're facing here, I'll just run you through what we know and what we don't know. So what we do know is that the RMP rules are outdated, and at outdoor burning it does need to be addressed. We've seen an increase in smoke complaints over the last 3 or 4 years. That's coming from 2 areas. It's predominantly coming from the Hort blocks, but also the lifestyle blocks. We do know that burning of the wet vegetation, when it's just cut and burnt within a few weeks, it creates quite a smouldering fire and a low temperature. There are now, and also in respect to the Hort blocks and the lifestyle blocks too, there is mulching that can happen. So 10 years ago when these rules were developed, there weren't these large-scale mulches out there. Now that we've seen them move into the region, there's some big orchard redevelopments happening. What we do know, we know that smoky fires cause a nuisance and they have health effects, and Kathleen will run you through those in the next few slides. They create PM10, PM2.5, which gets inhaled deep into your lungs, can result in asthma attacks, lung cancer risk, productivity days, etc. The other thing, it's important to remember that it isn't just outdoor burning that's resulting in this PM2.5 and PM10. It comes from a range of sources. Actually, the main source is domestic. Next is outdoor burning, and then transport emissions. And then you get to 1% with the port. I'll put that up there. The other thing that we do know which is happening is currently we work within a sort of a 24-hour average limit with the PM10 levels, and it gets averaged over that 24-hour limit period. So the WHO are actually updating these guidelines, and they're looking at evidence which is suggesting that there may be health effects occurring at such a shorter time frame. So that's 1 hour. So you would see those outdoor burns being captured if they do go forward with this new advice, because they're shorter periods that they happened, they spike the levels, but then over a 24-hour period it levels out. So they may be captured in that. So on to what we don't know. What we don't know is that we don't know when burning is necessary for the disease control. Are there diseases out there that there's just, if you prohibited outdoor burning and then there is a disease material in an orchard and you can't burn it, is that disease going to go rampant through Hawke's Bay? We need to do a bit more research around that. When is it necessary? Can it be done via mulching or drying out? We also don't know the costs around the large-scale mulching. We know that it is viable to get it mulched, but then once it's mulched, moving that product is quite expensive. We don't know what those costs are. It could be unviable to do that, or it might be completely viable. The other thing which we don't quite know yet is whether the exemptions in Rule 19E are being misused. So Rule 19E is for disease control and orchard redevelopment only. A lot of people, well, what we're hearing, again, we don't know this for sure, is that people are cutting, pruning, undertaking the burn, and then saying it's for disease control. So there's no way of knowing when you turn up on site, or compliance turns up, is this for disease control? Yes, it is. There's no way of telling if it really is or has been. The other thing, we don't know if this is region-wide or Hiratonga Plains specific. It seems that it's probably more Hiratonga Plains specific with the urban areas, but we haven't done the research in other parts of the region to find out if it is an issue. I'll move on to Kathleen, who will talk about the health effects.
Right, I was just I've attended a talk recently, a Zoom talk that from Professor Graham Zosky, who's at the University of Tasmania. He's the Director of the Medical Sciences there. And it was a very interesting talk about the fate of inhaled particulates. And this isn't specific to smoke particulates, but particulates in general. But I found it interesting, so I've just grabbed some of his slides and information to share with you. And we have there a graphic of different particle sizes going from the really sort of ultra-fine particles up to PM10, and it gives an indication of the sort of the mechanism by which particulates are deposited on your sort of lung cells, airway cells, as you breathe in. And so for those larger particulates, it's mainly by impact or kind of a sedimentation, kind of a settling. For those very, very fine particulates, they act more like a gas, so they deposit more by diffusion. And there's actually a little sweet spot there that you can see, sort of the deposition rate. It's kind of a combination of both diffusion and sedimentation, but not that efficiently. They're at that sort of particulate range, they're more likely to be breathed in and then breathed out again. And so on the other side there, you've kind of got a diagram of your airways. So the green is just the bigger main airway, and then as you go down into the lung, and the red area is kind of your gaseous exchange area. So you can get, in that main sort of large airway, you can get the PM10 type sizes being deposited by impaction, but also right down in that gaseous exchange area through sedimentation, because there's a longer residence time. And with the very fine particulates, that tends to be more deposited down in your gaseous exchange area through the diffusion. Now, you sort of also showed the schematic of cells sort of lining your airway and in the gaseous exchange. And again, the fate of particulates, one is that it may just become in contact with mucus in your airways, or the sort of ciliated hairs on some cells, and be captured that way and either coughed up or swallowed. Or they may, if they enter the gaseous exchange area, they may be enclosed by macrophage type cells that are there as a defence mechanism. Or they may enter your cells, or they may go through the tissue and enter your circulation or lymphatic system, where that sort of controls your immune response. So you'll start getting an immune response there. And he showed this diagram of, in this case it's a rat, but they just imaged, in this case it's ultrafine to nano sort of particles being inhaled by a mouse or rat, and over time, and I think it's just about an hour there, and how it goes into the lungs, and then you can kind of see a darker red spot around the heart, so it goes into your circulation and starts concentrating in the heart, and also down in the bladder via the kidneys. So it just gives you an idea, when you think particulates, you think, you can understand the effect on the lungs, that it might compromise your lung health, but when they start talking about cardiovascular health and other effects, you're kind of wondering how and why. But with these sorts of diagrams, you can see how it can get through your system. And the little table there was a study on some workers. In this case, it was exposed, it was an incident that they were exposed to high particulates, and in this case they were radioactive, so they could actually monitor the particulates over time within these workers, and they found that even after a year there was still 50% of these particulates still in their lungs, and even after getting on towards about 3 years there was still 30% there. So it's kind of the take-home message there was, that these particulates can stay in your body a long time. So even if it's in an acute exposure, to a certain extent, they have the potential to have longer health effects because of the time that they can spend inside your body. And so, that's a sort of some of the responses that they can trigger in tissues and cells. And so the ultimate health effects are your respiratory disease and cardiovascular disease. Those ones are really quite well established. The other ones that have got question marks against them are where there is growing evidence of health effects, and things like metabolic disease. I mean, like that, there's growing evidence about gestational diabetes. There's an influence on gestational diabetes. And with the neurological sort of cognitive impairment. And so it's also, and it's, that was the last one. So, and also it's been shown that, if we see there, it talks about impaired response to secondary insults. So there is evidence with COVID-19 that people exposed to like wildfires in the US and Australia have more severe symptoms. There's kind of a link there with COVID-19 and exposure to particulates and general air pollution. So in terms of monitoring, as noted in the paper, in terms of outdoor burning, it's very hard to monitor specifically for that. It crops up and we don't know when or where it's going to crop up. What I've got there is just our ambient monitoring at St John's College, the daily PM10 over time, coloured by temperature, so you can see that we get our exceedances over the National Environmental Standard, which is 50 micrograms per metre cubed, over 24 hours. So we get that obviously in winter and cold temperatures, but you can see that has come down quite steadily over the years. Just in more recent years, we seem to have plateaued at that 55 as our maximum concentration, that 55 micrograms per metre cubed. So it would be nice to tuck down under that. We have done studies where we're actually looking at what's in the filter over the course of a year, both it's at St John's, Awatoto, Mariwa Park, and particularly St John's, Mariwa. That showed that in winter, the bulk of the particulates is from biomass burning, but we can't differentiate between biomass burning that's done in the outdoors or by the domestic wood fires. Our emissions inventories have suggested, indicate that it has come from, the bulk of it is from domestic fires, just by sheer volume of fires that are lit at night. But I've also noted in there the limitations of those emissions inventories, that they are concentrated within the air sheds and haven't sort of included outdoor burning outside it. But we have, you see the decrease in concentrations there, and we have targeted domestic burning. So obviously, that to a certain extent it supports that other information that we've had in terms of the emissions inventories, that we've had success targeting the domestic fires, and people have done a great job in taking up cleaner heating, and that's shown as our emissions inventories have shown that our emissions have been declining over the years, and it's reasonably commensurate with the decline in the maximum concentrations. Also, what's kind of also supported that was that the hourly profile of our PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations, where you do have that peak in the evening. You have a little peak also at 9 o'clock-ish or 8 o'clock night, that's kind of mid-morning time. That could be, generally that's quite evident across the country, and it's typically been associated with people getting up and relighting fires, or in larger centres with the rush hour traffic. You can see a little peak there at 12 o'clock too. That's an area there that has the greatest separation between PM2.5 and PM10. PM2.5 is more from combustion. That's really combustion type sources. PM10 can be combustion plus natural, such as sea salt. So that more lunchtime one is when the one picks up, and we do tend to get a bit more in the way of sea salt coming in. But that's not too, the one of the unknowns is to what extent is the outdoor burning being done and hanging around, and then when the inversion comes, kind of as the inversion is broken, but then later the inversion develops again, to what extent has the air maybe still been hanging around and comes down with the domestic heating to create the increase. We have, knowing that we had that limitation in our emissions inventory, we did in 2016, did an emissions inventory on orchard burning, and realised that it was being done that particular year. I don't know if it's typical of most years, that it was quite significant. I mean, it wasn't insignificant. If it was all to be done that winter and just kind of averaged out over that winter, it was kind of equating to about 20% of what was being produced within the airshed itself. And we tried to do some modelling of that, and that had limitations in that there's not much information about the buoyancy of those sorts of plumes or the temperature. So, but that tended to indicate that it was the main effects were localised around the fire, but there was some that was getting into the airshed. I've just, for illustration purposes, also included, like I say, that the actual individual burns are hard to monitor because of they're quite sporadic. So I looked at one case in which Rex forwarded some photos and a complaint. This was 8th of May 2019. And in that particular case, this was our hourly profile. So we kind of got that normal 9 o'clock little peak there, but we also got a later peak, which was both a peak in 2.5 and PM10, and that took that sort of particular hour up over 50 micrograms per metre cubed. So that possibly, on that instance, was an influence at our monitor at St John's, possibly from that fire, just with the, or from a combustion source, given that both increased, peaked quite substantially. And in a way that is kind of not too far off our modelling, which is suggested that you could get over 2.5 micrograms per metre cubed, average over 24 hours in the airshed. And so if you kind of take that peak and average it over the 24 hours, again, it comes out to something like about 5 micrograms, a contribution maybe of about 5 micrograms per metre cubed for their 24-hour average. So while our sort of modelling hasn't shown much, or it's, certain events can potentially raise levels, give us a spike in our ambient levels in the airshed. So I'll leave it.
Okay. Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, so onto the key options on how to address this issue.
Could we just have, I'm interested in the science before we go to the options. Is that all right?
Yep.
So what you're saying is that the outdoor burning inventory is extremely limited from your perspective, from a science perspective?
The air emissions inventory within the airshed.
Yeah. Your modelling doesn't confirm it, that there is an effect?
Not localised effects, because the modelling, the impact was, it's kind of, it's when I say no effect, it's not to minimise that neighbouring places aren't experiencing a major effect. But in terms of the influence on the airshed, it wasn't.
There's no
substantial.
evidence.
It was above the 2.5 microgram per metre cubed significance criterion, but that was.
Given the sort of the bulk and scale, it's very difficult to draw a conclusion that these particular fires on a particular day were influential over and above domestic fires that may have been apparent or any vehicle emissions on that day. Is that what you're? Is that what you're
it is hard to separate those things out.
Okay. So behind this, before you get to the options, the evidence from the science is excessively limited, or it doesn't enable you to draw a conclusion about that localised source. Would that be fair?
That would be reasonably fair, yes.
Great, thank you.
Martin?
Chair. I wasn't going to raise an objection for a leading question, but I'll try and ask an open one. My questions are, one, is this still a work in progress in terms of trying to untangle the relative contributions of domestic fires from open fires? That's question one. Question two is, the data that you refer to so far, as I understand it, is for the urban parts of the airsheds of Napier and Hastings. And so is it possible that it is under detecting the relative contribution that open fires might be having in the rural parts of our airsheds?
From the open fires undertaken in rural parts of the...
What I'm reading at 35 is, however, the inventory focuses on emissions generated within Air Zone 1 of the Napier and Hastings airsheds, i.e. activities that are effectively banned but are still occurring. I'm just wondering if the data that you've given us, which is 5 to 9% outdoor burning, or 20% from the 2016 study, might be under-predicting the relative contribution of outdoor burning to the overall airshed concentration.
Potentially.
And the other part is, are you trying to get to the bottom of that with existing research that's underway?
No, well, it's to do it, it will take quite a bit of resource to separate that out.
So that's not an existing work stream?
It's not, it's not an existing work stream, just trying to do the best with the information we're collecting.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for Kathleen?
I have a non-leading impartial question. Is the assertion that there's little or no link between these large fires and the PM levels in the air equivalent to the decades where people said there was no connection between cigarette smoking and lung cancer?
I mean, particulates do have an effect. It's really just the question here is it being picked up by a monitor? But it doesn't mean that it's not having an effect on people. Some, it's even hard to distinguish to what extent that burning is having and domestic fire burning is having at our monitor. But it doesn't, and even if we aren't picking up at our monitor, it doesn't mean that there aren't people in the firing line and suffering as a result.
Thank you. So it is the same.
Rex, you got a question?
I do. Firstly, on the stats, and thank you, Martin, for that leading question issue. That spike that happened on the 8th of May was an abnormal spike. So you say that it could have been linked to traffic and all the other bits and pieces, but it is more likely to be linked to that very large fire.
You're leading the witness.
No, I would, it was abnormal, and I wouldn't expect a traffic spike of that nature at that time.
So 19E, of course, is a special commercial interest group that put pressure on the council and got a specialist attention themselves. But I reported that fire in Portsmouth Road, that fire that was travelling north-east, the large smoke, and they reported back to me that it was compliant because of 19E. He was allowed to do what he likes, basically burn green wood, but he was within the zone. But he said that I said, well, what about it going into the inversion? He said there is no rule about it whether it goes into the inversion or not, which is counter to what you said.
There isn't a rule which says or specifies inversion, but it does talk about wind speed, temperature, which indirectly says if it's over the wind speed, if there's a little bit of wind and the temperature is up, then there won't be an inversion layer. So the rules are built around the inversion layer while not specifying those words.
So can I just a supplementary question? So currently, a horticulturalist can industrial burn huge amounts of green wood. It can go into the inversion layer, and he's compliant.
No, he can't. Just heard that.
Well, he did.
But is there a version layer? I thought there was some
True or
doubt about
not?
whether there's
Well,
a
there was
version
an
layer.
inversion layer. Of course there was. Is that true or not? Because that's what the officer, the compliance officer told me.
Jeff?
No.
Well, Rex, you just got the answer. If there is a certain wind speed and a certain temperature, then there is no inversion layer. And that was at the time. No, wait, excuse me.
One at a
I'm not
time.
asking you, Jared. You're not staff. I'm not asking you, mate. Sorry. I've already heard your interpretation of the rules.
Carry on, Jareth.
This is a normal debate, Rex, and whether you and I have had this discussion, yes or no, is immaterial. I'm actually just asking you the question because the staff actually looked at me with a question because I said that, and now we've got somebody with a cell phone. So I'm just answering the question on behalf of the staff member who already gave you the answer that if you've got a certain temperature and a certain wind speed, then there's no inversion layer, and therefore the compliance officer deemed it that it was actually compliant.
Point of order, Madam Chair. This is a question time where we're asking staff. I'm not answering fellow councillors who have a conflict of interest.
There were questions for Belinda and Kathleen. If you have any more questions for Belinda and Kathleen. Inawai?
Thank you for your technical report, and as much as I digest some of that, I sort of step back and ask some why questions, especially being, first term and not having some of the background that some of our other councillors have. So the first point I got out of, especially Belinda, our rules, is that currently our rules are not fit for purpose.
They are outdated. We're reviewing the whole RMP next year. Everything in it really needs to be looked at. The rules were developed back in 2010, so they do need reviewing.
Yeah, so right now they're not fit for purpose.
Yeah, we'd have to go through yes.
And another point is that we just don't have enough resource to be able to manage and monitor some of the things we'd like to be able to change the rules accurately, and that we have special treatment or exemptions for special groups.
There is an exemption for a special group, that's right.
And we're not sure, because we can't manage or monitor what's happening around those exemptions. So therefore, they could be misused.
Yes, that's right. It's very hard when compliance go to a property and that some prunings might have happened and they might have put a diseased wood about this big on the pile.
So we just don't know.
Woods. We don't know. We just don't know. And I don't know that even if we were resourced, whether we could monitor that, to be honest. It's very hard to prove.
So when we look at reviewing the rules, that we take into consideration these sort of flaws in which we can't monitor and manage, and therefore we end up in the same position we're in now, where there's special conditions for special groups.
Well, it takes a lot of work, so you'd have to take a step back and figure out, again, I think I alluded to in my slides, what we know, what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So what we don't know around diseased material is, do we need to burn it? Is that still what we need to do in 2020? Do we need to cut in orchard redevelopment and then burn it? Or can we mulch? And that's the things that you'd look at when you're redeveloping the rules.
And you often look into, you were talking about whether it's affordable for the industry or not.
Viable, that's right.
Viable.
Yeah.
Okay, and we usually have interest.
It depends on the circumstances. So going back to 2008, when the air plan was first proposed, there was everybody, including the horticultural properties, you needed a resource consent if you wanted to burn. The hort industry came to the hearings and they successfully argued that for these reasons, disease control, orchard redevelopment, they didn't have a viable option. There weren't big scale mulches, that they needed an exemption. And so that proposed plan got amended in line with that. there are a bunch of factors now that we can take into account when we're re-looking at those rules.
Madam Chair, could I perhaps just add to that answer in response
Yes,
to
James,
Councillor
thank you.
Ormsby? Of course, when we do a review and ultimately do a plan change, we do have to produce a Section 32 report, which will have to look at the costs and benefits of whatever is introduced. So those economic impacts on industries as well as households would need to be taken into account. I guess the other point I would make is that on the timetable we were proposing with respect to the overall review of the RRMP, we would at that time expect to have a revised National Environmental Standard, which based on what we understand will have much more stringent requirements around PM 2.5. Based on that, we would then be needing to look at all available levers to achieve the standard, and that would necessitate a discussion by Council and consideration of whether that burden for those tougher standards falls on household burning, where do orchard redevelopment burnings fit in all of that, and so it would be that the cost benefit calculation is likely to shift considerably once that new National Environmental Standard has been promulgated.
Can I just add an additional point? With those standards as well, there would be a requirement for additional monitoring, and I think that was reflected in the paper that you received last time. So that goes back to your monitoring question.
Can I ask the Chief Executive, what is the comparable situation to an industrial burn of a massive pile of waste on an orchard in the region anywhere? Can any other group have such a fire without a permit?
Well, certainly not during the within the airshed during those winter months. So yeah, there's absolutely an exception, obviously, for orchard redevelopment as per the policy.
So there is no other potential. So if I pull down a massive, great building outside of the airshed, which I think is a nonsense because a shed has walls, these don't. But if I pull down a great big massive building on the Hiratonga Plains and I was redeveloping it, could I go and put some accelerant onto it and just light it all up?
No, if it's treated timber, then it's
But
precluded.
it was not
Anyway,
treated timber. It was just
if it was untreated timber and it was outside of the airshed, then I believe you could burn it. I don't think.
Providing your smoke isn't offensive, objectionable beyond the boundary.
But the point is, it's not for orchard redevelopment.
That's right.
So
But that's outside the airshed. Within the airshed can only be for redevelopment, orchard redevelopment. Outside of the airshed, it could be for any purpose.
That's the point, is that the orchard redevelopment's got an advantage over anybody else for disposing of their waste. Simply burn it.
So it's a special provision based on the disease management needs of the industry.
No, not that. No, that's wrong, James. And redevelopment. Redevelopment
It's disease
and
redevelopment. So it's two separate things. So if it claims it's just redevelopment, you can burn it, according to them.
So the argument around burning in the context of redevelopment was that leaving cuttings and the redeveloped material around to decompose exacerbates the disease risk. So the two, as I understand it, were argued together.
Not how it's written, no.
Neil, then Craig,
Not how it's
then
interpreted.
Giraffe.
I go back to the smartest person in the room, and Dr. Kosniak, can you help me?
Councillor Curtin. Flattery will get you everywhere, Neil.
Can we just go to back to the data, the evidence? You've got your graph on the wall. Can you give us a sense of the relative contribution that during those time periods that the domestic fires and/or motor vehicles would have on the outcomes you're seeing in the data? Have you got a sense of that in terms of your inventory or any other evidence about the relative contribution? It actually answers Councillor Barker's question. Carry on.
Traffic is, I mean, I think we all know, is not a big player in Hawke's Bay. I think I've gotten there the figure from our emissions inventory and what the traffic contribution is. For that particular incident, like you can see, probably that kind of 9 o'clock peak there would be a bit of a combination, mainly probably domestic fires starting up and a bit of bit of traffic. But I would say that probably you are looking at about to me it probably is that that fire that was complained about, or the fires, the outdoor burning, for that around midday, just with the peak of PM 2.5. So it does, for those particular hours, look like, it's contributing about maybe 30 micrograms per metre cube for that particular period.
So across the suite, though, who are the biggies here?
Oh, the main, definitely, just by the weight of the population, the main is domestic burning.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but the orchard redevelopment work has, I mean, in one way it's great. It's going gangbusters. And at the time of 2016 inventory, they did note that it has increased over the years. So it's not the biggest player, but it's not trivial either.
Thank you.
Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. May 12th, or at least May 8th, was the middle of lockdown, so it probably wasn't huge amounts of traffic, just as an aside.
Well, that's last year's, sorry for interrupting.
19.
It's 2019.
Oh, yeah. It felt like lockdown then. In the paper, just around consultation, or just a process question, maybe more for the CEO. Why is this paper here and not to the Environment Committee and going through those parallel hoops or whatever? How come it's happened this way round?
So it's here because it's a regional resource management plan question in terms of the policy that we're discussing is reflected in an RMA document, which is the purview of this committee.
Okay, and then whatever this committee decides, then what's its life after? Will it then go to the environment or go straight to council?
It will go straight to council.
Okay. Then in consultation on about 70 or 71 or so of that paper, obviously there's a strong interest here from those involved, let's just say outside the air sheds that have been described, the horticultural industry and someone else, what they want to be represented or heard. Is this not the normal format for it, or too short notice, or shouldn't we open it up a bit further? Or, again, these are just process about, they're mentioned in there, so I'm not sure. Obviously they've requested it and someone said, no, you can't, or something.
So look, what we would be anticipating if the council was of a mind, well, this committee, sorry, was of a mind to want to progress a plan change. I think the wording we've talked about here is more around the sort of the exploratory nature of that. We would then trigger the statutory requirements to start the consultation process with affected parties. So we're a long way off adopting a proposal for notification. This is really just the very first drafting gate in terms of whether we're actually going to embark on this and start expending staff resources on the preparation of a plan change. Right. And certainly I think the view of staff is that we wouldn't want to embark on that until we know whether the committee's got an appetite, given all the other RMA planning work we've got to do, to go down this track.
Right, okay, well that's very helpful, so thanks for that. Two more points then. And the paper talks about only the air sheds of basically the Hiratonga Napier kind of region, not Wairoa or Central Hawke's Bay, of which this council covers. That doesn't seem consistent with the council's submission to the Ministry of Environment on the 23rd of July 2020, which is essentially saying that there will be new air sheds in Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay. We'll be looking to gazette those. So where's that consistency? Because I don't quite understand, although attention's on a few fires from around the growing area of Hiratonga, and it specifically does not mention, or it's silent on the rest of our region, and yet another paper here is talking about actually putting air sheds in other parts of our region. So are they linked somehow, or what's going on here?
So look, my understanding is that the proposal around air sheds in Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa is driven by the PM 2.5 standard, which is to say a tougher standard is proposed for introduction that will mean that those areas will need to come under regulation. But at the moment, this conversation is in relation to amending our current rules. If the committee decides to deal with this in the context of a review of the Regional Resource Management Plan, as recommended by staff, I would anticipate that we would hoover up this whole question into the full region, both of those districts, what burning rules need to be applied there, what are the air quality issues, etc. So
Correct, yep. And that's identified in the options in front of you. So in terms of option 1, that does cover the whole of the region, as does option number 5. So
Okay, so that's so option 1, going to the cut into the chase, does seem consistent with the submission to the Ministry of Environment about changes to the environmental standards for air quality. Am I right? There's a general theme in all of those options. They're all going to take time, regardless of where this committee lands. It's just what that time's taken up doing. But there's just, again, reiterating the point in the submission to the Minister. It constantly, for example, says the primary source of PM concentration comes from domestic heating in a number of our centres, such as Napier, Hastings, Wairau and Waipukara. So, again, we seem to have, the council seems to have a position and engaging with the Ministry of Environment and the Minister in regarding these submissions. And this, if we don't land in probably anything other than option 1-ish, or maybe another one, we seem to be diverging from a position already decided that we're advocating for here in this paper, which essentially says, you know, there's one quote here, we need essentially a lot more science and study, and we need time to develop our own tools. So even if we were of a mind to go down a route of, let's say, banning or monitoring more, we don't have the tools or anything to carry that out as described in this other submission. Is that right?
I think depending on what's proposed by this committee for a plan change, it is, and I think it's at least implicit in the paper, that there is some legal risk around the council being able to justify whatever policies it wants to put in place. And that risk always exists with a plan change. We have to put up an evidential basis, and Kathleen's science could be challenged by other independent science procured by submitters, etc. So part of what we would want to do if this committee wanted to proceed with a plan change now is get both the legal review done that's suggested in the paper around the risk, but also probably a bit of a stock take of science, and then come back to you with some advice about what is justifiable based on current evidence by way of changes to these rules. So we'd have to come back to you on that. And I guess in terms of the consistency with our submission, we were submitting on a new national environmental standard, and so that was the framework in which the conversation was being had with central government, as opposed to, we're not really all that concerned with your national environmental standard because we've got a problem that we want to deal with now, and we're going to box on within our own toolkit, as limited as that may be.
Sure, just one more, Chair, thanks. And I appreciate that, and thanks for the response, although the quote in here says this is of HBRC, Hastings District Council, Central Hawke's Bay Council and Napier Council, it's all in their name, requesting to the Minister that an outdoor burning guidance document is developed by MFE which provides further information to councils around best practice in particular, and then it goes on to ask for further detail. So again, we're already down the track of some of this work. There's a general acknowledgement that there's a problem and it needs to be addressed, albeit somewhat done sooner than later, but it's the depth of work and the advocacy that you've already taken in this place is already taking us down that direction, consistent with the submission to the Minister already, yeah?
So I guess we've pulled all available levers in relation to this problem now, and the question is whether you want to add to that with new levers, with all of the issues that gives rise to in the paper. So look, we recognise that air quality is not where we need it to be. We've made great strides, but it's still not where it needs to be. With a PM 2.5 standard, we're going to be even further away from where we need to be. So we've suggested to central government some things that we might need to help us get there. But then I guess the question for this committee is, in the meantime, if you're unprepared to wait for all of that to flow through, including the review of the RRMP, these are some of the other levers you could pull.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. I was just going to raise a point of procedure, Councillor Barker.
Mine's on question procedure.
Is it? Okay.
Just with respect to the line of questioning by Councillor Foss, it's all very well to raise these matters, but what we haven't heard is what is the response of MFE to that? Because MFE's work program might be radically different. We might ask for something or talk about something, but MFE might not be. So what do you understand to be MFE's view of this work? Is it going to be in the near time, or is it going to be in the distant time? And is it going to be about urban areas or rural areas? Is it going to cover the problem we foresee here on the Heretaunga Plains?
So Belinda's on the National Working Group, so she's probably best placed to answer that, even if she may not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Every indication from MFE that I've had is they're waiting for the election to take place, and then they can look into any new requests, and they could potentially look at adding things to the standard or not, and then they'll take into account like a normal consultative procedure, and look to amend it and put it out in the next few years.
Well, I asked the question because I do have some knowledge of the answer, and my understanding is that MFE does not see this as an issue for them, particularly to take up with any urgency whatsoever. They're kind of a bit bemused by it, as it seems to be like a Hawke's Bay issue. And I got no sense of it being done anytime soon. So, the issue that Councillor Foss raises, yes, we put the request in, but I get the sense that nothing's going to be done about it anytime soon. In fact, not even certain about the long time.
I think reform of air quality standards is still a priority for them. The issue is that orchard redevelopment burning is somewhat specific to Hawke's Bay. There are obviously one or two other regions, but particulate matter from combustion, particularly household fires, is still an issue in many parts of the country. So I think that as well as transport emissions are still quite clearly within priority.
Agree with that.
But it's the outdoor burning with orchard redevelopment, which I don't think they see as a high priority in the overall national picture of issues.
Surprised by it.
Is that fair?
Take a question from Rex, thank you.
Madam Chair, with your permission, I did speak to MFE along with Belinda. They had no idea that this was an issue. They had no idea. They're not doing anything to do with outdoor burning. They are on fires, of course, but they were completely taken back when we talked to them. It is not in their brief. If we want to fix this, we're on our own.
Madam Chair, my point was this last 45 minutes started off with a technical question from Councillor Curtin, and wasn't clear that we were entering into the debate phase of the issue, and I'm just wondering if we could go back to the presentation, which was going to start talking to us about some of the options for what I think we'd all agree is an issue, and then perhaps we'd come back to it. So that was
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I will do that because we do need to go through the options and move on with the next items on our agenda. Thank you.
However, I've had my hand up for quite a while.
Yes, sorry, Sheriff.
Okay. First of all, there was an accusation made that I have a vested interest. I don't. I don't burn. I'm an orchardist, but I don't burn. And if you want to hear the whole story, I haven't burned for years and years and years because I've got plastic nets over my orchard. And you know what happens if you burn? You lose all your plastic netting, and it comes at close to $70,000 a hectare. So I don't burn. I don't have a vested interest. Also, all my orchard waste actually goes into my house. It either heats the water or it actually heats the house. So we actually don't make any damage.
Is that Rex?
It's firewood.
It's a chainsaw.
Somebody's chainsaw's going. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. And I didn't know we actually had gone into the options yet. However, I see there is actually two halves to your presentation. One of them is a lot of, we're not quite sure, we think it does. For instance, if you have on the 0800, and I talked this morning to the, the compliance staff who deal with the 0800 line, and for instance, yesterday there was quite a lot to do about a fire. Or fires, and it never been so bad before. So I rang Mike and asked him the question, and there was one fire in Portsmouth Road. There was a second complaint, but I couldn't even find where the smoke came from or where there was smoke. I actually went to that fire myself as well, and actually it was absolutely clean. All of you who are here have actually seen the photos, and that was actually really well burned. So I would like to take you first to table 1 of the paper. I've got a question around that. There seems to be a remarkable drop-off in burning complaints. You haven't got in here infringements, I see.
So Nick is probably, someone from the compliance team is probably best to answer details around this, but I'll do my best with what the information they have given me is. There is, I think, a paragraph in here about infringements being 101 infringements. I think that's in paragraph 20. So that was issued in response to outdoor burning activities in Hawke's Bay.
18, that was 2018 and 2019.
And the information up until July 2020, that's not the whole burning season, is what you see. That's probably why you see a bit of a drop-off in the complaints. And that it's not everything. It doesn't take you through to September. It's just up until July, whereas the burning seasons will be a full burning season in the other sections of that table. I do know that there was a big push in 2019 to go and check out these fires and see what was happening and see was there smoke around the boundary, what kind of effects they were causing, were they complying with the rules.
So, and that's definitely, there's a drop-off, and I've asked the staff, and that definitely seems to be, by raising the issue, that definitely has occurred, and I definitely see around my region, and that's, the Heretaunga Plains, between Hastings and Napier, that there is actually a lot of wood currently still on the ground, and of course we've had these large mulches as well. Then I'll take you to table number 6. So let's take, I'm a bit baffled. How did that 8th of May 2019 slide appear in your presentation? How come that specific one actually got into your presentation?
I've only been sent, I knew that I'd been sent some photos of a particular day, and that was seriously, apart from the one this morning, which I didn't have time to put a slide together, that was the only one of my emails that I could find, so I had a look at that.
You have a lot of detail around it, but anyway. So taking you to table 6, where we're talking about hour of the day, but also you see there on a weekday. There's also Saturdays, Sundays. There seems to be an increase of pollution as well. Correct?
It's in that particular, so you have got, it's comparable, sorry, the evening's comparable to Monday. You do kind of get a bit of a flattening of that kind of 9 o'clock sort of peakish bit as people get up at different times. You haven't got quite. So
weekends, often more people are home. People do less shift work possibly. So once again, it points very much that the issues that we have is actually home fires. Correct? That's really where the issue is.
By different measures, that seems to be the major contributor.
Yeah, that's right. So we have got a Healthy Homes program where we have encouraged our community to change over either to compliant fires or to heat pumps and so forth. And I think we got to be commended as a Hawke's Bay Region Council and as a community. If you look at the data, when you actually measure the temperature and the instances of being over the 55, that we actually definitely see a drop-off so that we're actually on the right track. Wouldn't you agree? Okay, but we can't identify whether this is actually orchard burning.
That's a difficulty. It's identified as biomass burning, so whether it's domestic, outdoor, where it comes from. There's actually because GNS Sciences can analyse the filters to get some gauge of the different sources. So the techniques they've got currently doesn't distinguish. There is, I've seen recently in Australia, where they've had the bushfire season, that there was like a particular component where if it's kind of visible deposition on a windowsill, they've got a tape and they can examine that tape in a particular way, that they are able to distinguish between like the wildfire smoke and domestic smoke. But so I guess that's developing technology, but it's kind of getting a deposited surface up people's windowsills, because obviously the bushfires were extremely bad over there. Getting this tape and collecting that sample and analysing it that way and getting a gauge of was it wood fire, was it domestic fires, was it bushfire.
Excellent. I'll leave it at that for the meantime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathleen, I was wondering if you'd like to talk about too the localised effect versus the total contribution to the airshed. So because it's sort of, there's two issues here. You have the localised effect that is right around the boundary of the site and will affect homeowners that could be not even neighbouring properties. And there is the contribution to the airshed that everybody's breathing into, the ambient air quality. So maybe Kathleen,
Yeah, I mean, basically there's no known safe level of particulate concentrations. So it's really a case of trying to get continuous improvement. And so you have got, it's kind of an exposure thing. With regards to the airshed, you have got a larger population that would be exposed. But there's also particularly the localised effects. So the people surrounding the fires are going to, particularly if they're they're a sort of sensitive population, so they're older people, children who have compromised health, then they're obviously going to experience some impacts if they are exposed to reasonably high particulate levels or even sort of. And as noted in those sort of slides, it's acute. An acute exposure there's indications that by acute exposure that these particulates can maybe stay in your system quite some time and have sort of long-term effects.
So you're talking specifically in town because that's where the concentration of young people and older people are?
Anyone that may be surrounding these fires. I mean, I don't specifically. There's some schools that are maybe on that urban fringe.
So you're talking about these fires is actually the open burning fires of diseased wood, or you're talking actually about the house fires? Because you've quite clearly indicated that actually most of the pollutants actually come from house fires.
Yeah, they were measuring at our monitors in the airsheds. It's just not to discount what may happening to people that are nearby these outdoor burnings that they have maybe experienced a compromised environment. So
if somebody burns according to the rules, which is a very hot fire, and this is it has got a certain amount of airspeed and there's a certain amount of temperature, so there's no aversion layer. We've had that discussion, so we don't need to go there again. These particles, as I understand it, smoke is unburned wood, and that creates particles. If the burning is done properly, then there is actually no particles that are available.
Yeah, if you got an efficient burn, then your particulates are minimised. But just by the nature of outdoor burning, they aren't going to be as efficient as within a contained environment. They're certainly drying it helps a lot, and it reduces. And you can see that it reduces the particulates, but just the nature of outdoor burning itself, I don't think you would get a 100% efficiency.
No, you wouldn't get that, but a normal fire wouldn't get that either, even in town.
No, but more in a controlled environment, then you can improve your efficiencies.
So if somebody in town burns wet wood in a compliant fire, would there be particulates becoming available?
Oh, certainly yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll take a question from Tanya Hopman's been waiting for 20 minutes. Kia ora, Tanya.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you. I did ask a while ago if I could ask a question. So we've actually skipped past it, but the recent conversations just circled round to it again. And this is really, I think, a question for Kathleen. We've just heard that we can have acute exposure, that we can have exposure to harmful particulates over a short period of time that could have a long-term effect on health. When I was looking through the paper that's been prepared, and thank you for your detailed paper, the one thing I didn't see was what information is there from the DHB or other health-related organisations who could actually shine some light on what are the actual ailments that our people are suffering in our area, and whether this sort of, well, you've said that the effects or the harmful effects are widely known, but I'm just wondering from our own DHB or other organisations, what are they saying about the effects of this sort of activity on our population that we have?
I think for the NES submission, they outlined their concerns. Are you able to speak to that at all?
I would think, Tanya, that it would be very in line with what Kathleen is presenting. The evidence here is really well known, and often it's extrapolated. You can talk me. It's extrapolated down to a regional level, so they'd be relying on that and then looking at it in a local context. So it should be very, very similar.
Okay, well, I just know from my sort of anecdotal, well, just from what I've heard, that Māori do suffer a lot of these untoward effects that you have mentioned, and I do see Māori as being a very vulnerable population, as well as all those others who have immune compromised, if they're in an immune compromised situation. So I'm particularly concerned to know, obviously not today, but what the actual statistics are in our region for our people. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Tanya. I'll take Rick and then Rex.
I just want to come back to the science here. Because it seems to me that the only station you have for measuring equality we've got here is St John's College.
No, there is Marua and Awatoto as well.
But the one we talk about in Herotong Place, St John's College, right in the centre of town.
Yeah, because that's mainly where, at St John's College, sort of within town.
So outside of that immediate vicinity, we've not got it, or a particularly good idea.
We did, I did put out 6 extra monitors in 1 year, and one of them, they were in the airshed. One was just on the outskirts of the airshed to kind of the south. I'm just trying to think what road it was. But it, was it? Yeah, it's kind of in that area, yeah. So I think I kind of thought it was kind of this sort of area around here.
Out to the south.
Yeah. And that was the lowest of all the monitors that I put out there for that winter.
The second thing I wanted to get some understanding of is that how does this machine actually calculate it? Because I'm just wondering, is it take a sort of a sample of air every hour and so on and then measure it, or is it
It's collected on a, it's like a little tape, and the particulate gets pulled through an inlet and deposits on the tape, and it uses kind of beta rays to how kind of dirty the tape is as its measure, and it does kind of a measure every 10-15 minutes or so.
So it's a continuously moving tape every 15 minutes?
No, it just so it's kind of subtracting different measurements from the previous one. It's on the same tape. It moves at midnight unless it gets particularly dirty. Then it will move on, but it's collecting on the one spot. And then it moves at midnight and creates another spot.
So it's a piece of tape for a whole day, sucks in air onto it, collects the particulates on it. Some sort of magic eye looks at it and then sees how much is on it, and every hour takes a different image and then subtracts from what it currently gets the hour or hours beforehand differently what's happened to that hour to give you a cumulative effect. Is that what's happened?
We're different, yeah, not so much an hour, like every kind of 15 minutes doing
15
that measurement. And so we get those individual measurements. It makes its own 24-hour average. We do our 24-hour average of the measurements that we get.
So I'm just trying to figure out how does that therefore, it's got a reasonably steady state, I would have thought, over the city of Hastings, compare with someone who lights a massive fire on the edge of Hastings to sort of put up a smoke into the air. How does it distinguish between that?
It wouldn't unless, like with that, unless the plume moves in the direction of the...
So the plume would have to move over St John's College
to pick it up.
Okay. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that what we don't have here is natural human observation. I live in Hastings. I watched these things for a long time. And I can tell you that I have seen, a pall over the whole of the Hastings-Heretaunga Plain, which when you look at it, you see the smoke column come up, hit the inversion layer and spread out. I've seen that for myself. But I've never seen the same extensive plume of smoke from household fires, ever. Nothing ever comes. Household fires have never got the extent of what I've seen industrial burn-offs in Hastings. So how is it that my personal observation just doesn't take into any measure of this?
Oh, that's why we do have the complaints register, and that's why we do kind of consider, particularly for those sporadic type events, it is a valuable resource in terms of as a monitoring resource.
Could you give us a daily report, councillor, and we'll do away with it?
I'm quite happy.
Saves a lot of money.
I'm quite happy to do that. I mean, part of the reason I got here because I had people complain to me about having to, at the council's behest, put in a $5,000 compliant fireplace. Went inside and looked over the boundary of the air shed and saw this great big huge plume of smoke heading towards them. And I said, why do I have to pay $5,000 when someone can do this and no, they have to do nothing, Rick? I couldn't answer them. So I came to the regional council and said, oh, because they're in a different air shed. So I went to my neighbour and said, oh, they can do that because they're in a different air shed. The neighbour said to me, well, where's the walls, Rick? Sheds have walls, where's the walls? I couldn't put them. Made it a joke. I found this very difficult to answer.
Okay. Moving on, Rex, please.
Yeah, I have a question. I just want to cover that one. They actually can burn wood for redevelopment within the airshed. So this is a lovely little picture we got up there.
Yeah.
But my question is this. So we have rules around green wood. We're quite strict around that with our fire merchants, our wood merchants, and we've all regarded that you can't burn green wood. And our fire merchants buy the wood through the summer and they store it and they sell it 12 months later. Does anyone on our staff believe that a tree that is chopped down, not cut up, but left as a big trunk with trees, left out in a paddock in the winter with the rain and wind blowing on it, is dry in 4 months? Does anyone believe that?
Thank you. So moving on, we want to break for afternoon tea at 3. So if we can get to the options either before afternoon tea or before afternoon tea. You want to do the options?
Yes.
Right. We'll do the options and then we'll break for afternoon tea.
Okay. So I'll just quickly run through a summary of the key options, more detailed in an appendix to the paper. So we have and they're just principal options. You can mix and merge and change. So option 1 is, this is the outdoor burning is being considered as part of the RRMP review, which is scheduled to take place next year. The benefits of that really is that you can consider it in a region-wide context, and you could look at maybe making rules that are consistent for the urban areas across the region, have a look at how outdoor burning is affecting Wairoa, Waipawa, whether special rules need to be made, etc. Option 2 is a bylaw option, and this is a bit of a different option because it doesn't mean that there is a review to the RRMP, but it really is. So this option would look at a prohibition if that's what was desired, or some restrictions on outdoor burning. It would need maps. It would be reliant on NCC and HDC determining this was most appropriate and wanting to be part of the process as well. I won't run you through all the pros and cons because I'm sure you've read them. We got to option 3, which this is a dedicated plan change to the regional plan. This is just a straight prohibition. This is obviously quite clear cut. It's easy for compliance to enforce because if there's burning taking place, it's not allowed. It's got a few concerns, as in you can't take into account unforeseen circumstances or implications of doing that, because once it's prohibited, you can't do it, full stop. Option 4 is another dedicated plan change, and this is just quite a small plan change. However, taking into account there's never really a full plan change, it always takes quite a bit of resourcing and financing to get it through. But this would just require anyone in the airsheds to notify the council if they're going to be undertaking burning. So this is actually quite powerful in that I think it would cut a lot of burning out with people just cutting and burning, because they're notifying the council, they would be making sure that they complied with all the conditions. If you're a lifestyler, you're not going to be notifying the council that you're undertaking burning during the winter months because you're not allowed to do it. So people just wouldn't. It'll be clearer cut for compliance. The problem with that is just really the financing and the resourcing implications about that. It's quite a high cost in the short term. And then we'd look to update the rules when we got to the RRMP review. And then option 5 is a dedicated plan change to look at the region as a whole. A lot of pros and cons around that as well. Don't know whether you could have consistent, I suspect that you couldn't, outdoor burning rules across the whole region, because you have urban, you have rural areas, and every area needs different rules that you need to take into account and consider. Again, resource implications are high, and we simply just don't have the information for the greater region. We don't know if outdoor burning is a problem, whereas we're quite clear on Hiratonga Plains it is causing a problem at the moment with the complaints that are coming in. So they're really your 5 principal options.
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time on this, and especially with stakeholders, but also with Rex. And I feel there is actually a way forward. We're going to see change anyway. My belief is we will have total burning bans in time to come. There's no two ways about that. You know, that's where the world is going. In Europe, they already have it in places. Holland and Belgium have got it. Germany has got it, not in all areas in Germany. Their main issue is the 2.5 from diesel, older diesel engines. So certain bigger towns, you can't drive your Volkswagen Golf in if it's older than 8 years old. So that's where they already have moved. And I believe we will get there too. But we also have an issue with our house fires, because that's really the elephant in the room, is if you've been listening to me, is that's really where the issue sits. That's where we have got major pollution. But I still believe, and I won't have a view on it, because our housing stock in New Zealand, especially in the East Coast here, is not of a quality that we actually can move away from compliant good heaters. Because it's a practice that we undertake here. In Europe, very little fires are now being used. It's all either by gas or it is electricity. So what I have indicated and have put on the table with stakeholders as well as with Rex is that no burning during the winter months, regardless. I would even go outside the airshed. I will go further. And the reason is because if somebody is non-compliant burning, and the reason in Virgin and it is a southwesterly which you have on a frosty morning, you can burn outside the airshed and it still moves in, and we've heard about that. So I think over time we need to stop that from happening. Currently, we can't rely on mulchers, as you have indicated. We have got 2 large machines operating. I've seen a couple of orchardists trying to do it with smaller machines. It's just you're not going anywhere with that. The two large ones that we have got are twice the price of what now it costs to actually burn diseased and wood for development. The other problem we have got is what do we do with the mulch? So we actually haven't got an industry at this stage that actually is ready to accept that mulch. It is fantastic good product that we can use for all sorts of good things, especially composting. In Holland, all household and garden waste is centralised into the centre of the country. It all gets all puts into mulch, gets into unfortunately plastic bags.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
And goes back out again.
Point of order being called.
I'd just be interested to get to the question, Madam Chair.
Okay. So my question is it possible if we go to option 1 that we can get to a point where we give ourselves time to actually get practices underway that they'll be acceptable to the stakeholders that we will be engaging with, as in those who are at the moment burning diseased wood and wood for redevelopment.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, option 1, it will take place over a period of a few years. So we'll be engaging with the stakeholders and talking about alternatives and getting direct input from a range of stakeholders, from a range of issues, and doing it all at once.
Okay, and would you agree that already we're on a trajectory that we're actually reducing the amount of, I'm not talking town, I'm talking about redevelopment in diseased wood, that actually the amount of burning is already reducing and the level of non-compliance is reducing?
I would prefer to get compliance to answer that.
Okay.
From the indications from them is that it is reducing a little bit. It's on the verge, but they haven't seen that come through yet. But a lot of the big players are looking to do the large-scale mulching. So I think you're right and wrong. I haven't seen it come through in the complaints, but there is indication that the big players are moving to the mulching because they don't like to outdoor burn anymore.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Rex.
in fairness to Gerard, and I'm trying my best to be fair, aren't we, there was a point of order against him, but aren't we in a position now where we are actually debating the options?
No. No one's put a resolution.
No resolution.
We're discussing the options in terms of people having questions on the options that have been put up.
Until somebody moves.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question.
Question from?
Yes, please. If possible, let's just say I'm a lifestyler just outside of the airshed, in more particularly Hiratonga, and so if these options would come into play, and I've trimmed the hedge, there's a big pile out there, I do it once every goodness knows how many years, leave it for a while, be it 2 months or 6 months or whatever, and I burn that. Under each of those options, my status quo is I can do that right now. We all know black smoke and plastics, all that's already illegal. We all appreciate that. So, and under any of those options, does that prevent that person doing that? Or one of them, I think, they'd have to come and apply to the council for a consent to do that, or permission or something. I'm just trying to see how would that land on the ground for the lifestyler that we've been talking about a few times.
I think that's because there is a lack of detail in this, and this is because we're coming to the committee to get some clear direction on where to go, because each of these options you can spend months just sort of detailing up. So it would be best if we could go away with a preferred high-level direction, and then we could come back with that detail. But what I can say is with option 1, you could look into that and take that into account. Like, is it reasonable to expect a lifestyle not to burn at all if he wants to burn just once every 3 years? With the other options here, obviously a straight prohibition, just he would not be able to do that. In Napier at the moment with their bylaws, it's not lifestyle, but they do prohibit outdoor burning full stop on residential properties. So it could just be an extension of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little bit confused about the point that Councillor Van Beek just raised, no burning during winter, it's curious that Rule 19E actually says you can only burn under that exemption during winter. What I'm trying to understand, and if anyone in the room can answer this, why would any orchardist need to burn during winter? That's one question. The other question is the issue whether the burning is in winter, or is the issue whether the wood is wet? In other words, what is the issue for the industry? What is the practical concern for the industry in simply waiting until the wood is dry and burning it in summer? Why is this even a problem? How much of an orchard does a stack of wood take up? I don't understand, or is this, you're back to the disease problem? I'm just not sure I understand the practical constraint that would be of concern to the orchard industry in stopping this.
So that question was asked during the hearings back in 2008 or 9, because they need to replant, so it's really a winter activity. They cut their crop, they have the crop, and then they cut it, and then they clear it, and then they want to replant.
Yeah,
And
but
so
couldn't you
they-
just tuck it all over there in a corner?
It's massive.
The other thing is that typically Hawke's Bay has a fire ban for 4 to 5 months.
Right.
And when the wood is driest is when we're on fire ban, and winter is when you can burn.
With the drought.
Yeah.
I think it
So that's the
takes
issue?
up
Yeah.
large areas. When you look at even the mulch, I was surprised at when they mulch them. They're huge, the big piles of mulch along the property.
Well, I will stick with this question then. Is the issue the burning in winter, or is the issue that the wood is wet?
Both.
It's both.
It's both,
It's winter, you've got the inversion layer,
which is the conditions. but
it's
the
the
rule-
conditions,
but the
that's
rule
happened
says-
more often in the winter, and also the wood is wet. So the wood to be dry will need to sit outside at least for a year, maybe more to be really dry. The people, I went through an orchard the other day, no one cut the trees down, they were pulled out. Roots and all, sat in a big pile.
Yeah, that's right. And all the information from compliance is that's just getting lit, and it's cut in some instances, not all, but it is getting lit 2-3 weeks later, and its roots, soil, everything.
And is there an issue that...
Will then Rex after you,
I was
Martin.
going to say, is there an issue that if the wood sits there for a year or two and it's diseased, that disease can migrate elsewhere through the orchard? Is that the other dimension here that...
The disease is a
Might be
question
missing.
mark for me because I don't know, I don't have the information around that. It has been a limited period of time developing this paper, so again, high-level direction from the committee would be good, and we can come back with those
Thank you,
answers.
that's been helpful.
Will, thank you.
Yeah, mine was a bit around the disease too. Are they cutting them down because of disease, or is it disease because it's sitting there? And if it is diseased, is the mulching actually going to, where the fire obviously gets rid of the disease, the mulching, I guess, isn't?
Yeah, that's what we need to look into.
Find out.
Madam Chair, I need to just, the reason I've redeveloped orchards. Yeah, the reason they do this is they cut down the trees. I've never redeveloped an orchard like this. But the modern way is they cut the trees, they store them for as little time as they can, and they get rid of them because they have to fumigate the ground. To replant. You can't replant, especially these what's called M9 rootstocks, which are it's a dwarfing rootstock, which they're all replanting to. You can't replant M9 unless you fumigate. You have to fumigate in early spring, so it has to have a certain amount of warmth. So it's a very efficient process for the fruit graft. The only problem is it's not very good for everyone around them. But for them, it's absolutely a very efficient process. In terms of the disease, the most important disease is a disease called canker, which they have in Europe a lot, but they don't have so much here. But they are getting a bit, especially with some of the gentle sprays that they're using, because they're using a lot more gentle sprays. So the canker is a problem. But in Europe, and Jeff can testify to this, they mulch the trees which have canker and take them away. So in Europe, they manage this, and their industry is 50 times bigger than us. And they're managing this. So I just don't get it that our guys can't.
Thank you. Neil.
Well, Madam Chair, I think we may be up to the point of coming to a conclusion, and I'd like to therefore move recommendations 1 and 2, excluding 2.4 and 2.5.
I've got a question. Can I ask my question before we move to debate?
Yep.
Question. About the reason for the uprooting and then the burning of the trees, there seems to be an implication that is for disease control purposes. But is it more a case of changing from one variety of tree to another? Because the variety of tree that there's in the ground has now passed its time with a new, more special, spectacular variety which will get higher earnings. There seems to be, my impression is that nearly all of the orchard redevelopment is driven by new varieties, not about disease at all. So the disease and the pulling out of the trees is not an issue, it's just putting in new varieties.
Yeah, that's true, but I think to Rex's point, you've got the fumigation to ensure there isn't disease seeded in the new crop, and so part of the risk mitigation of that is burning all the old material.
I get it, but the trees aren't pulled out because they're diseased. The trees are pulled out because they are now no longer in fashion, like bell-bottom trousers.
Two reasons. One, they're going into a new root stock, and the other one is going to a new variety.
Yeah, the trees actually do have, the European canker is like an organism that actually lives on the tree. So as the tree gets older, it's harder to keep on top of, and so that in some cases orchardists have chosen to actually then bite the bullet and actually get rid of those trees because they're just too diseased and it's too hard, especially the raw Gala variety gets it bad, the Kenzie gets it pretty bad, and the Jazz apple gets it pretty bad. But we've also got a large group of organic growers who cannot actually use chemicals that others can in Europe and in New Zealand. And so they actually, at some point, want to completely eliminate that point of disease, clean up their orchard, A, by burning, and 2, by fumigating, so they can start afresh again. So the organic industry, who's trying really hard, as we know, to do what is right for the environment and for us as community as well, they really struggle if they couldn't burn. But once again, and Rex is absolutely right, in Europe they now have got to, and before you go to point of order, in Europe they actually do mulch, and what they do, they have big mulches on top of trucks, and so they mulch the tree, they put the tree through a mulcher, and it actually ends up in the truck, and the truck drives it away. But they have an infrastructure in place that they already have developed over time. We are not there yet, but we will get there.
Thank you. Neil.
Well, I've made a move. I haven't got a seconder yet, but my motion is recommendations 1 and 2, but not including 2.4 and 2.5. So therefore, essentially going to the staff's option of option 1. Recommendation around that. So I haven't got a seconder, so I may not get there.
Are we going to discuss this when we have a bit of a break?
No, we're just someone else.
Discussing tank.
Nominations.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So 2.3 effectively.
Neil, how do you take out 2.1 and 2?
They're included, Rex, as I understand it. So it's 1, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3.
And 2.6.
Direct staff, 2.6.
Oh, well, I guess yes, but although I think 2.6 did really relate to 2.4 and 5, and I think in our mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
But just so I get this again, can we just go, what's been moved? 1?
Recommendation 1. Recommendation 2.
Recommendation 2.
Excluding 2.3 and 2.4, sorry, 2.4 and 2.5.
I'm sorry, I'm lost.
Sorry, what did you say, Rex?
I'm lost, I'm sorry.
He's
option 1 and option 2. Option 1 and option 2, you're saying?
He's saying 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3.
Page 92 in Stella.
1 and 2.
Page 92 in Stella, Rex.
He's looking for a seconder, Gerard.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Gerard.
All right, Rex, you got that?
Yep, you got to move in a second.
Do you want me to-
Did that include 2.6? It's the same as
Yeah.
2.5.
Need 2 points?
We can come back to you on 2.6 if
Okay.
you wish.
So
you can
just
leave
the
that.
2 points, up to 2.3. Do you
We
want to
have a
speak?
seconder for,
Gareth?
which is Jareth, so would you like to speak
No,
to
I,
that?
I- just very briefly, the first comment I'd make, Madam Chair, is the excellent piece of work done by the staff. Really, really crisp and clear about what the options were, and their recommendation, option one, essentially is the most practical and obvious position for us to be in. But I'd also like to thank and pay tribute to Rex's tenacity on this. Nothing in the way of his advocacy over the last, and Jeff as well. Nothing around their advocacy around this is dismissed by pursuing option one. In fact, it gives that opportunity to really get in behind this and come up with solutions. The other observation I'd make in going to option one, and why I believe it is the most obvious option, is that we simply do not have sufficient evidential base to progress this without going to the policy itself and developing it at that level. So we go out to the stakeholders and come to a collective position because we simply don't have enough evidence to progress something that, in my mind, would be challenged significantly. So from that perspective, I think we would do well to go down that road. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there is an issue out there. I think we all know that. Councillor Barker observes that very often, and it's a real thing. But we need to be careful that are we in fact going down the right road? Should in fact we come down hard and fast on our domestic burners? Is that another option that we need to pursue? So I think the review in itself will enable us to go right across the board and consider the options and come out with the best solution. So well done to staff for an excellent presentation and report.
Can I ask a question before I give a debate? I just want to tease up something that I meant to come back to before. I wasn't sure we're going to go to the question, but I just want James to explain when the rules say that it's for disease and redevelopment. I said to you that I thought that the two were separate. The people were burning for redevelopment, not for disease purpose. But you said that the wood has to be diseased. It has to be diseased, and it's being for redevelopment. So disease is the only reason you can burn for.
No. So the policy, the letter of the policy is either for disease or for redevelopment. The point I was making was that when industry advocated for the ability to be able to burn as well as for redevelopment, the argument was based, as I understood it, on the concern about vegetative matter lying around for an extended period of time on a redeveloped orchard that presented a biosecurity risk. And I think that's borne out by the comments we've had from both Rex and Jareth, which is that you've got to do a clean slate of the land when you redevelop, and part of that's fumigation, but part of it's also removing all of the material that was previously there.
All right. Well, I was unconvinced by their explanation on that, but that's not about it. Okay. Thank you.
I think that was largely what industry argued.
That and the fact that 10 years ago there just simply wasn't a way to get rid of that redeveloped material. There weren't large-scale mulches around, so the burning really was the only option.
Yeah, I speak in favour of the motion, especially being the seconder. And I think what it does, it actually buys us some time. It has brought it to the surface, and it, of course, it has been at the surface for a little while, thanks to Rex. And this is an issue that we need to deal with. And it's not so much our community. I know that our industry will come on board because we've got the industry have got consumers. They're very knowledgeable, very well read, and the likes of the large corporates. They're really getting these questions, what they are doing with their trees. And they've been given the time to change their practices, and they're now starting to happen very fast and very rapidly. So I think this is actually a very sensible outcome. Thank you. Thank you.
If there is anyone else that would like to speak to the motion before we put it? Rex?
Well, I guess life is a series of compromises, and I'm very sad that we're going to put this decision off, it appears, for 2, maybe 3 years while we twiddle our thumbs, because all the facts are in front of us right now. And it has been mentioned that that our major growers, and in fact 6 growers control 60% of this industry, and of that 6 growers, most of them don't burn. They're really doing their best to solve this problem. So, and I'd like to commend them for that. So, you know, what we have here, a situation in Europe, there is no burning, outdoor burning at all, for all the absolute reasons. And you know, this thing has, this rule, this what 19E has been totally and absolutely corrupted by certain growers. And there's only a few, but they're enough to cause huge amount of damage. And they just redevelop at an industrial scale and burning, whether it's diseased or not. And it's nothing to do with diseased wood. They are taking out old varieties, old rootstocks, putting in new rootstocks, and they are just doing them quite ruthlessly, because I just want you to think about some numbers here. If you buy an existing orchard now that's old style 106 on land where Sheriff is, it'll cost you around $140,000 per hectare. So think that as a capital cost. If you're to pull the trees out and do a redevelopment into new rootstocks and new varieties, it'll cost you another $80,000 to $100,000 a hectare, depending how you do it. And if you burn the wood, or if you mulch instead of burning, it'll cost you between $2,000, one grower, one large corporate grower told me $2,000, another one told me $7,000, so let's say it's $5,000. So 1% of the total capital value of this project is to help the environment. And most of the large growers have worked those numbers out and are doing it. What we do have is growers around the side, within the air shed, without the air shed. Who cares a hoot? That smoke's going up, and just like it just goes wherever it likes. And yesterday, it was definitely hitting an inversion layer, and it wasn't going south, it was going northeast, right over Hastings. I'm not sure what kind of damage we're doing there. I'm not sure which eggs got it, because it went over Flaxlair. I'm not sure who got that smoke and who got it, and you won't know for 20 years whether it affects them. But why is a child in Europe more ill than a child here? And we have to now wait 3 years before we can get it, because we're just going to ask a whole lot of silly questions which we already know the answer on. There's no way we should have outdoor burning of wood. And that wood is green. This wood is green. We won't let little old lady in Flaxmere or Havelock burn green wood, but we'll let these growers burn green wood. It's an outrage. So, but anyway, I know I've probably got a compromise. I'll probably abstain from it, because my next move will be, I have to consider my next moves. But I'm not going to let this go, and I'm not going to wait. I don't think the people of Hawke's Bay, Hiratonga, should wait.
I have one more question from Nikki.
Could we have that motion put up on the screen, please?
Take the next speaker, or wait for the motion to go up.
Sorry.
Gone too far.
That's it.
Yeah.
Isn't 2.6 in?
On the shelf.
Staff weren't sure.
Which one's that?
Did you knock out 2.6 as well?
2.6
Yeah.
down
You're not going to be any direction to the staff?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Direction to the staff. I like that. Cast
Always
adrift.
have direction.
Even if you don't give direction, you get direction. That is a direction.
It's kept it up in the others, I think.
That's blocked, that's carried already.
Rebecca?
Not yet.
What a carry.
You need to go.
Don't go
Okay,
there.
afternoon tea.
Let it go up.
Take it back
It's 1.0, 2.1.
Yeah.
and
2.3.
Yeah,
2.3.
that lot there, yeah.
2.3, isn't it, Neil? Didn't you say that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
2.3.
There you go.
that's right.
Martin?
Oh, thank you.
One more question?
No, so I wanted to speak to the motion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Can I do that? Yeah, look, I just again wanted to thank equally Rex and the staff for bringing this issue to our attention, and the conversation's been very helpful. I'd have to, by putting it in context, just observe that this is the most significant health issue that this regional council deals with, or will deal with. I'm looking at the paper from the last, or the RPC meeting in June. 1,200 premature deaths a year from air quality, from air pollution. This is an order of magnitude above anything that any of our water quality issues would be creating if properly managed, or that we would, even condone as acceptable. So we can't sit around, and I sympathise with Rex's, frustration about this. But I'd have to say, on balance, the only viable option I can see, and the only sensible option from a resource and an integration planning perspective, is the option on the table. I would invite and strongly encourage industry to come to the table with a code of practice around this issue, to actually head off the future regulation or the need for it, and to show what it can do. That can quite often be the way with central government. The threat of regulation brings people to the table, and we see how well an industry can perform. So I'd really encourage the industry to do that around what is quite seriously our most significant health concern as a local authority. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a couple of points. Firstly, the regulations are not fit for purpose. There's been a dramatic change in the industry. In the 1990s, there were basically small orchards, whole hundreds of small orchards, all owner family operated. The industry's changed into much larger, bigger orchards now. And so there was a collection of small fires, but by and large, people who chop down trees to replace them because they're old, they're not because of fashion, chop them up and put them into bins and sold them as firewood. So quite often orchards would distribute their firewood all over the place, and it was burnt gradually and bit by bit in inefficient burners, I might add, but it was no mass burning. What we've done now is orchards have aggregated, got bigger and bigger, and so we have an industrial scale burn-off on the Heretaunga Plains now of a size and a scale which we never saw 20, 30 years ago. It's been quite a dramatic shift. And it goes up into the air and people see it. And people complain about it. And while people complain about it, the regional council says, we're going to have an inquiry and think about a plan change. I'm with Rex in here. I know people say it buys time, but for those who are affected by it, there's not a lot of time. So I share Rex's frustration on that. The other thing is that people seem to think that because it goes away with the wind, it somehow disappears. But it's still in the atmosphere. It's still going to go somewhere and harm someone. That's the point of it. We should burn less rather than more, and we should get this under control. Yes, it's accepted. We still have quite a range of household fires in Napier and Hastings, and increasingly they are into much more efficient burning machines. I can attest to that. Mine chews through wood now faster than it did before, simply because it burns so hot. I can't, the damper doesn't seem to work anything. It just fires up and away it goes. So I just have to accept that. And when you look at the chimney you've got, you can't hardly see anything come out of it. So it's a much more efficient. I accept it's a better deal. But we're all going to be going to heat pumps over time. I can see that. And it's just going to take us a while to transit families of fires onto heat pumps. But people do need to be warm in winter, and I think we just have to sort of accept that we are in a position where a lot of households in Hawke's Bay are warmed by fires because that's what they've traditionally been. We can't afford the expense, or they can't afford to accept the expense to shift. But the point that Rex makes is that industry does have a relatively cheap option in front of it in terms of mulching. And it's a very small proportion of what the actual total cost of redevelopment is. So when you think about the inconvenience, the cost of inconvenience, it's easier to rest with the orcharding. And I think the time for massive industrial burn-offs on the Heretaunga Plains is over. And whatever idea Rex can cook up to move this along faster, you can guarantee my support for it.
Got a couple.
Thanks. Just noting that Regional Council is actually one of the biggest burn-offers of piles traditionally, and so obviously we've cleaned up our own act, noting the big mulcher we had out there on the Karamu recently. But just through Chair, can I just make a comment and invite the CEO to work with Giraffe to invite the industry to put in writing best practice that you were describing earlier. Just keeps good faith, keeps communications going, hopefully builds trust. And as Rex said, the vast majority of the industry are already in this space. Well done, we should celebrate that. And hopefully with Giraffe's assistance and maybe the industry, we can get 80-90% over. And there'll always be some outliers, but if I can just ask you to work with him on that, and if that was to come, that was tabled and shared with this committee and or the larger council.
It's a good idea.
Thank you. Okay, no further discussion on the motion. One more, Tania Huata, Hopman, sorry.
Kia ora, everybody. Look, I hear and agree with all the comments that have been made. I thank you, Martin, for reminding us of the 1,200 deaths per annum, I think you said. It is a shocker, and I do think we need to do something about it. But I also acknowledge, so Rex, I really thank you for bringing this to our attention. I am concerned about how long it will take and the effects that even in the short term that will have on our people out there in the community. One thing I did want to note though was if we did vote in favour of this motion supporting option 1, I did see that staff had made a couple of recommendations that in the paper that weren't picked up in the recommendations, and it came under the non-regulatory methods under paragraphs 51 and 52 of our papers. And for those of us who are feeling uncomfortable about the decision, and it really sort of comes back to what you were saying, Martin, about, well, encouraging the growers to come to the table and offer some other solutions. I see in 51 and 52 here, there is also recommendations around the HBRC doing some further work. And I'm wondering what scope there is to include that in the recommendation that's been put forward, because for myself, I agree with Rex, something needs to be done, but I see the practicalities of forging ahead with one of the other options could be just problematic. So I would like to see these non-regulatory methods being put in, and what can we do, and as governors, rather than just say we'll wait till option 1 can be implemented. What else can we actually do immediately to bring these growers to account for what they're doing? So what's the option here? Can we add 51 and 52 to the option 1 recommendation?
That's an amendment to the motion.
Councillor Curtin, if you added 2.6 back into your
Yes.
motion, then that would
Yes.
That would suffice.
Yes,
That's why I asked you.
that's correct. But on their advice, I acceded.
So when I
To make you comfortable with
when I
incorporating
suggested I get
2.6.
turned out flat, the staff suggested you accepted meekly.
Yeah,
Tania, the answer to your question is if we add 2.6
2.6.
to that, it will direct the staff to do exactly that in 51 and 52.
Okay, well, I'd prefer that 51 and 52 are added expressly because that's what we're talking about. Otherwise, that can get lost,
Yep.
in months to come. trying to remember the thread going back to the bits in the paper.
Well,
Are you happy to make?
Just a minute.
I think it's implied if we include 2.6.
I think so too.
On the understanding that it would include future reporting on development of non-regulatory methods with the industry.
yeah.
Okay.
But there might be other options that come up.
That's right, in the meantime.
It says that staff report
Okay.
is my
So are you,
So the
has that been
motion's
moved?
staying as it is? Is that correct?
Just
And 2.6.
accepting, mover and second is accepting the inclusion of 2.6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would accept that.
Yeah.
Do you want me to close, Madam?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I think that was a very useful discussion all the way around. I'd just come back to the point in summing up that I think we need to stick with the science. That's where we ought to be in this era of scepticism about science. Let's hold fast to the science. One of the things I would observe about this, though, is that the evidence around the effects on health are not firmly established, that the fires that we occasionally see, or not regularly see, on the plains, we're jumping to a conclusion that they are causing these deaths. Well, we don't have enough evidence for that. We can speculate, but at the end of the day, we don't have that. I also observe fires from small block holders on a Sunday morning. The air is filled with thick smoke, so we need to manage that issue as well. But going to the points made by the Chairman Rex and from Tania, and referring to 51 and 52, already, Rex, we have seen a tremendous shift in thinking by the industry and by the community because you've raised it and it's out there. We can do even more than that. What we're seeing is in real time the effects of us going and raising issues in the community. And notwithstanding the option one, which is to consider the plan changes that we could invoke, we can already go out there and change behaviours, change attitudes, and bring about the result that we want to. We don't have to wait for that, and I think we ought to wrap in this, and I'll be looking forward to the 2.6 coming back with communication options right across the community, not only with our sector groups in the horticulture industry, but with small block holders and those that like to burn on a Sunday morning. So I think that ought to be a part of the whole package. I think we can make rapid progress in the short term, but then bring back to the table a long-term solution through an enforceable plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the motion put by Councillor Curtin and seconded by Councillor Van Beek. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against? All those against? One.
Who's that?
Nikki.
No one to abstain.
What's he doing?
He's
He may
abstaining.
have been against.
He's abstaining.
Abstaining.
Rex.
Who was against?
Can you do that again, please? Because that's not clear to me.
Okay. All those in favour of the motion put, raise your hands. How many do we have?
I think Api raised his hand and then put it down.
Is your hand up, Uppy? 11.
Yes.
Come on, my arm's getting sore.
Yeah, I like that.
Tania Huerta,
Personal problem.
are you voting or not?
She might have another opinion.
Is your hand up or down, Tania Huerta?
It's up.
I'm voting for what we agreed to in our previous meeting as the tangata whenua read.
What's that?
So she's not voting.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. So
what
you've
it
got
means.
two other calls to make, against and abstain.
Yep. 4 against and 1, 2, 3, and 3 against and 1 abstain, isn't it?
You've got to call it, so people know what
Call
vote.
against, please.
How many votes?
But you've got to ask those against.
Yeah.
Who's against?
All those against?
Nikki.
Nikki.
You've got just
one.
Just
one
one.
against.
No.
And you've got to call abstention.
And any abstentions? 1, 2. Any abstentions? 3.
Bricks as well.
Yeah, 3 abstentions.
3 abstentions.
So we've got 12 for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
The
it
motion's
passes.
passed.
Was it?
12 for as a pass.
Yeah. 12 if we've got 15, I think we've got. Nobody else arrived?
Yeah. All right, so I
Um,
think
So the
the
motion
abstention,
is
I feel
passed.
free to attack anything that falls behind that. I'm not committed to it.
The motion is passed. Thank you. We'll take a short break, during which time we'll also
Chair.
have a discussion on tank.
Just before we do, could I get some guidance from the committee? Dr. Smith, oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
Oh, he's gone. We were going to suggest that we we'll actually refer the State of Environment report through to Council directly, and we can brief Tangata Whenua at the next hui on that, just given that was an information item, and he can then get on with his day, and so we just stick with the decision items for today for the remainder of the meeting. Is that okay?
Yep.
And the meeting's due to finish at what?
4:30.
Scheduled 4:30?
Yeah, scheduled for 4:30 finish.
Quickly?
Can I just say to you, I'm gone at 4:30?
Yep, okay.
We'll lose quorum at that point.
We'll lose the quorum.
4:30 PM, I'm out of here.